Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my playthrough of Hearts of Iron 4 with Third Reich events installed. Well, it's a preview of it. What I've made so far, and we are currently testing. So let's continue this. Just trying to show it off as well as sort of test it as myself. As you know, these aren't working. Some of these aren't working right. Let this roll a couple of days. We've got Anschluss with Germany. Stopped. Okay. National focus. We're going to go over and do naval rearmament. We're going to let that go for a couple of days. I want to do some 38. I'm going to start it. Well, I think I'm pretty satisfied with the government currently. Okay, first of the year. Another event that I think I'm going to have delayed a bit. It happens after Anschluss, but I think I'm going to put a year date time, and I don't think we've hit it yet. As a minimum. This George 1941 sent me a few sort of high resolution images of the front pages of the Los Angeles Times from this period. And they had a bunch of great stories on international stuff, one of them and as well as US domestic stuff, but this is the story headline: Goering orders all Jews to get out of Austria, and I quote the article there. You can't really read it too well there, at least the beginning of the article. I think that's a picture, you can hardly see it, of Goering. It's definitely identified a picture, making this speech. Definitely a picture of Goering identified as being in Vienna very close to this time. So whether he made more than one speech and was photographed, because he was speaking to a radio, or not, I don't know, but that's the level of research I try to do. Is, if you look at his uniform, you can tell it's a rather early Luftwaffe uniform as well. But I'm partially the disruption of the bringing in Austria, which I think should be a bigger national unity disruption, and of getting rid of the Jews. You lose 3% of your national unity there, and we've gone past the first of the years. Get this going. Let's see, is there another 38 tack up I'm waiting for? Yeah, these. And we're going to get your radar going. Watch and see how our intel on the units that are on the border will go from just sort of blank and most of these here. Just when they're not touching once we get units up to the border to do some reconnaissance. Yeah, as you can tell, I'm really not planning on playing through the start of any combat, but I am playing. So let's just now we can see some training in strength levels or organization levels. Once Germany got Austria, Czechoslovakia was doomed for more than one reason, but the mountains along here are pretty rugged. I'll be surprised if any of you have ever heard of the Potato War. There is actually a war generally called the Potato War. It was the last war that Frederick the Great fought. He attempted to invade Austrian territory in Bohemia here. There were, as battles are called or thought of in the 18th century, there were no battles in this war. Basically, he tried to invade. Austria mobilized its forces, had a lot of Jaeger type units. Some were mercenary, some were sort of standard Austrian type army units, and there was a lot of skirmishing going on, and a lot of the fight was the sides were fighting each other, mainly the foraging armies. 18th century, they definitely did bring supplies along with them, but they also tried to forage supplies, and they were fighting over potato fields often because the soldiers, particularly the invading Prussians, were going around and trying to, as they moved into the Austrian territory, going around to some of the potato fields and digging up the potatoes. And the Austrian troops were skirmishing with them. So there was battling, but there wasn't a battle. A formal army set up on the field fighting, like at Blenheim or Waterloo or whatever. So that's why it came to be known as the Potato War. Basically, the Austrians won in that Prussia got no new territory out of them. He wanted to get this rather industrialized area. This happened at the beginning of the American Revolution. 1778, maybe a little before that. But it was just about 6 months long or something. It was a sort of a short thing. But the point is these mountain passes were fairly easy to hold, and the Austrian unit, and they were, battalion-sized units fighting battalion-sized units during this, but they kept the Prussians. They were coming in from multiple fronts. Was sometimes done, so they would get to be able to get through, concentrate their forces, and have a formal battle, and so they were able to hold up there because so these mountain passes are very defensible. So the Czechs developed a lot of border fortifications, as can be seen here, and generally the natural border. So there was some hope of defending this, especially obviously if you're talking about the 100,000 man army. There's a lot of hope. You could start invading Germany, but there was some hope of being able to defend the border before Austria, so long as minimum Poland was neutral, and France, because remember at this time here there is no west wall, and if you're talking before 36, the Rhineland is not remilitarized, so the French can walk all the way in and reoccupy it, because at this time it was mostly unoccupied, though there were my understanding is monitors in the demilitarized zone, but there really wasn't French military occupation at the time. There had been earlier. So they could, with that being a vigorous French attacks, it was thought that Czechoslovakia would have a hope of being able to hold out. Well, they hadn't fortified the border with Austria, 1. 2, as can sort of be seen here, low hills and plains with some, it's the city, but the ability to just drive in deep into Czechoslovakia, basically from its rear or flank, however you want to look at that. It extends the border as well. I mean, even if this was fortified and just equally mountain, it's that many more divisions having to sit along that much more of the border. And what goes from being a strategic asset of all of this territory back in here that's hopefully producing those, Slovakia wasn't very industrialized within it, so it really wouldn't produce too many war materials, but would hopefully grow food, be manpower reserves that was sort of in the rear and hard to attack, goes to being eminently cut-offable now, so it's losing, it's actually becoming a negative from a military sense, no longer a strategic depth, it's now greater borders to defend. So this just becomes a mess, and so once you get Austria, you are no longer with any real ability to defend your borders. And now that we have that, we're going to start building some more destroyers. I know I'm not importing any resources, and I should be. Czechoslovakia was building a rather modern army. They used a Mauser rifle very, very similar to the German Mausers in this exact same caliber. The main, I mean, there were all little minor differences, but the main difference is the bolt that you pull back was straight out to the side and not turned down to the side that the Germans did. They had very good machine guns, particularly they're the ones that designed the Bren gun. Bren gun stands for BR Bruno, EN Enfield. The Bruno Arsenal designed the gun. It just basically converted to the Enfield caliber that the British made. They made very few of those. There was sort of the earlier ZB-26, which was a 20-round magazine, slightly earlier version of the gun that the Germans continued in production, continue using. Again, the same German caliber. They're doing those. They have the 35T at this time. They start right around this, coming up in 38, start designing the 38T tank, which stays in one form or another in production until the end of the war, as the Hetzer. The Bruno Arsenal does some really good artillery designs, including they make probably the most advanced, at least prototype guns for mobile artillery, and coming out in the very late 44, early 45. That's why I say prototype. They never get put in production, but the Czechs designed those for the Germans. They produced a fighter aircraft that was evaluated by the Germans. Well, they've been producing an earlier model, but they started in production with a new, just started our pre-prototype designs of, I forget Avro or something. I forget. Forget the model. It's covered in Third Reich events, but thanks to George 1941, who's informed me a lot about this, and he's contributed a lot of the stuff dealing with Czechoslovakia, really helped out the Third Reich events for Black Ice. That when the Germans evaluated the prototypes to see if they wanted to keep them in production, basically their decision was it wasn't enough better than the 109 or the current model of the 109 to have both in production. So they acknowledged that it was better than the 109, as you know, obviously the 109 was improved and upgraded as the war goes along, but in 39 when they get a hold of it, it's a little better than the current 109 version, but not enough better. And they weren't going to convert all of the 109 Messerschmitt production to this Czech model, and to having two models in production at the same time and having to supply the parts needs and all that would need a significantly better aircraft than the 109 for them to do that. They did that with the Focke-Wulf 190. Not that it was better than, though, and you can look at particular models and versus particular models. Not that it was necessarily better than the 109, but the 190 used a radial engine. Radial engines are produced different and use different machinery to produce than inline engines. The 109, as well as the Czech models, were inline engines. You can easily convert the factory from making the 109 engine to making the Czech engine, or back and forth, but it takes significantly different machinery to make the rotary engine. The 190 used a rotary engine, as well as other German craft did. Some of the transports and others used rotary engines. So it was one of the major bottlenecks in building fighter aircraft were engines. So having the Focke-Wulf 190 in production allowed you to take advantage of the rotary engine productions for fighters, as well as the inline engines. That's why Germany did the dual operation with both of those fighters throughout the war, because of the various factories, and expanded it. That's just another history. Okay, so here is now you get your benefit organization. Tote is formed. Talks a little bit about it. There's the picture of Tote, when I was telling you about that they used for this, though they obviously reversed it. It does sort of look black, but you don't see the armband here, but the armband in the larger photo is clearly darker. Him in his SA uniform. And so we can decide not to do it. It's stupid to do so. You lose a little political power in starting this, but otherwise it's all benefit. Notice the icons, until I did this, I didn't know they get smaller once you start filling up the rack. So I'm keeping that in mind in future when I make them, to know that we'll get however many rows that you can have here, but also how seeable they are. That's a little organization tote banner. Actually, all three of these are from photographs of real things. That's a metal. That's from a cuff title, embroidered cuff title. And that's a little pennant that hung on the wall. I left off the little cord that would hang, but you can sort of see the OT symbol there for that. So you get that. Now you see, look at, now they're not very big, because unlike the 4-year plan, which will go away at the end of the 4 years, or if you start a war, organization tote stays throughout the war, or throughout the game now. So you have all these benefits for, basically building every, the factories, refineries, and all fortifications and anti-aircraft you get benefits for, but it's only 5%, and which is meant to, at least for civilian factories, is to counteract that. And so now you have the 10% bonus construction speed there, and the 5% for infrastructure. I don't know how many roads you're going to be building, but and 5% for refineries, which you very well may be, but you have that all going now. A lot of little benefits, which makes those build a bit quicker. So I think we're going to end this, series entirely here. 3 episodes is a little bit longer than I thought I was going to go with. I thought maybe 1 or 2. But I just wanted to show off. There's still more that I've added to it that just later in date. Haven't got to yet. But this will give you an idea of what Third Reich events will be for Hearts of Iron 4. Just a bit of a preview, and like I say, I really do want your input, particularly now, because it'll influence everything I'm doing, whether you think I'm giving too many benefits, or this is going to go away fairly shortly, but then you're going to get another one. It's going to be a different program that's going to start building you. But so we've been going all this time with a 5% deficit here. Once we had this, you got a 10% bonus, which is just going to go on for that. But this was meant to have the 5% counteract that. But once you're done producing the defenses, that then just becomes a bonus that stays with you. So is it, a benefit, building a civil factory or two earlier in the game that stays with you for the whole game has a greater longevity bonus than one built a year later, say, or 2 years later. So some of these minor things have a sort of a scoping out detriment. So it's sort of how we're playing. I'm looking at all of this. So love to hear what you think. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.